Once again, happy Black History Month to all of the history makers in the country. For those that we stand on the shoulders and move forward. Thank you again for joining us for our overview of the 2022 General Assembly legislative session here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We've got a great lineup, so please stay tuned. I'm Dr. Claville. This is Save the Water. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'd like to thank all of you again for joining us this Sunday at 1 p.m. as we broadcast live from the campus of the Norfolk State University here at WNSB, the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA, home of the Spartan Nation. We have our producer in the studio, DJ Scandalous, also known as Marvin Folks, which you can hear live Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. here on Hot 91, the soul of VA. Well, look, we've got a phenomenal show planned for you. So we're going to get right into it because we've got one of our phenomenal delegates that's representing the greater Norfolk area and more specifically the 90th Virginia House District. We have with us Delegate Angela Williams-Graves. Delegate Graves, thank you so much for joining us here on Stay the Water.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to speak with your listeners.
You know, here on the months of January, February, and March, what we love to do on Stay the Water is have our overview of the General Assembly legislative session. And here, you know, this month is no different, but more importantly is Black History Month. And, you know, we like to have our history makers on, and without a doubt, you are a major history maker here in the greater Norfolk area and really over the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we applaud you for the work that you've been doing on behalf of citizens when you were serving in the city council and even now on the state level. So thank you for all the work that you do.
You are too kind. Thank you.
Well, listen, you know, as we do this general overview, you know, we like to have our alums on and we talk about how, you know, the fight behind the scenes, you know, this, right, you know, the sausage making of legislation, you know, we see, you know, individuals see like a duck on water. You see it's so graceful, but underneath, you know, you're fighting like Hades just to survive. And
man, my little feet are paddling, boy, I tell you.
You know, and look, and the same is in the legislative session. Look, I want you to tell us a little bit about what's going on from your view of the 2022 legislative session.
Well, you know, again, thank you for having me. And one of the things that I am is resonating with me and that I'm walking away with, and that I think is so very important that I have learned during this session, is the need for us to continually stay involved and to pay attention. I find that oftentimes we do our civic duty. You know, we do our civic duty and we go vote. And then we say, okay, we'll just let them handle it. And that's fine. We live in a representative body of government, and that's totally fine. But what I don't necessarily think that folks really understand is what happens when we don't pay attention or when we don't vote, or maybe when we say our vote doesn't matter and our vote doesn't count. And what has been very evident to me more so now, because I had a friend of mine that asked me, am I seeing this? Did I see this at the city council level? Or is this something that I'm, you know, having a brand new realization for? And I was honest with her, and I said that it's something that I have a brand new viewpoint of in this, in being in the General Assembly, and that is the sheer nature of how partisan things are in the General Assembly. And what I can tell you without a doubt is Democrats may not get it right every single time because we are such a diverse group of people, that there is not a one-size-fits-all for everybody. But Republicans are truly rolling back all of the progress that was made on criminal justice reform, on voting rights, on women's rights, on things that really make a difference to the everyday lives of people. And while those changes and things may be minor, collectively, they are very impactful to our community, communities of color, working class communities, middle class communities, and there are so many bills that start with repeal or do away with or return back to, and it's literally that we represent, again, a diverse body of people in the General Assembly as Democrats. And it's very easy for the other side to stick together because they recruit like-minded people to run. And they see, they simply see one kind of person. They see one kind of constituency. They don't see all the demographics and all of the diversity that we see. And so, I hate to say I don't think that they care, because some of them are very nice people and some of them have some good ideas.
Right.
But in terms of what protects and helps advance Black people, people of other colors, other minorities, and women, and middle class and working class people, it is so important for folks to vote and for them to be involved, because you're going to see, you're really going to see the result of the 2021 election over the course of the next 4 years.
Right.
And it's not going to be very pretty.
You said so much that really helps to dictate, what goes on behind the scenes dictates what's going to happen in policy. I always tell people, Delegate, that politics and policy are very different. The politics of things is what you hear, the stump speech and the messages to get your voter base out. But the policy is where the rubber meets the road and what dictates the behavior of people. So you touched on repeal. During the last 4 years previously, there was so much progress that took place as it relates to education, telling the full history, as it relates to voting access to the ballot box and the like. And we're going to take a look in our second half of the show after our conversation about where we are in the bills that were filed. Talk to us a little bit about some of those bills that you fear that may, kind of give you trepidation, but may have a negative impact on voter access and education of our history in our schools.
There are a couple, but one that, with regard to voter access, that really, we had 45-day early voting. And there are Republican states that have had 45-day early voting for years, right? There's a bill that passed straight along party lines. Not a single Democrat voted for it. Every Democrat voted against it, and every Republican voted for it. And it was to reduce early voting from 45 days to 15 days. There was another bill, and the gist of the bill, if you will, was to make it so that if your absentee ballot wasn't at the back at the registrar's office on election day, that your absentee ballot was not counted. That was another one. Every Democrat voted against it. Every Republican voted for it. And because we have a Republican majority, it passed the House. Now, ideally enough, what I would encourage folks to do is to beat down the doors and the emails and the telephones of the Senate. Because all of these bills right now, we're in crossover we're in crossover, which started last week on February 15th.
Yep,
and that's pretty much the midpoint of the session. Okay. That's where everything that passed in the House goes over to the Senate, and it all has to be hashed out, presented, go through committee over there, and voted on. Right. And the same thing with every bill that came through the Senate comes over to the House. And then the senators have to come over and they go through our committee process, and they present their bills, they fight for their bills and things of that nature. Prayerfully, a lot of this bad legislation, because we do have a slim majority, and I do mean slim, a slim majority in the Senate, that they will hold the line in some of these bad bills that will harm voting rights, that will harm, that will freeze there's one bill that I spoke on the House floor about freezing the minimum wage. It's at $11 an hour. And there were two crazy bills with that one, right? One was freezing the minimum wage, right? With no sunset of when it would increase again, right? So we just gonna freeze it, right? And so I can almost work with you if you say we're gonna freeze it for 2 years, and then we will, and then it will increase, but it's just a freeze. So there's no end in sight for it being $11 an hour. And then there was the one where they wanted to say, actually there was three. So the second one was the one where they wanted to say that if you had an employee at $11 an hour and you paid health insurance for that employee, whatever the employer paid health insurance part was, that you could deduct that from your $11 an hour. So, for example, if you paid $350, give or take, a month for your employee who works 40 hours a week, that's almost akin to a $2 an hour raise, right? So if they're making $11, you can deduct that $2 an hour, and now you only have to fiscally pay them based on $9 an hour, right? That's going backwards. And then the third crazy one was if you have less than 10 employees, you don't have to pay minimum wage at all.
Really?
Yeah.
So what are you going to pay?
All of those passed along party lines. Every Republican voted for it. Every Democrat voted against it.
Wow. So because of the slim margin, well, actually the majority in the House is flipped. Now it goes, because there's crossover, it goes to the Senate. So now it's in the Senate hands. Exactly.
So I would encourage everybody to, number one, because here's what we do. All right. My first responsibility is to the constituents that I have in the 90th district. I would love to help everybody in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Okay. But my first responsibility is to the people who elected me and the people that I represent. And that is, generically speaking, the way most delegates look at how they expend their resources with regard to their staff in helping in constituency services, and how they look at and evaluate emails for or against a bill, a piece of legislation. So I may get 40, 50, 60 emails on a subject, but I may only get 5 of them with people who have addresses in the 90th district. Right. Those 5 people are going to get the bulk of my attention with regard to their issue, their complaint, their perspective on the bill, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're the people, the folks in Northern Virginia, love them dearly, but they're not my priority. Right. Folks in the western part of the state love them dearly too, but they're not my priority. But the thing about these bills that is so detrimental is it really doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're in the western part of the state, if you're in Northern Virginia, if you're in Hampton Roads, $11 an hour is not a lot of money. And especially when you start talking about larger corporations who are making million and billion dollar profits. Are you kidding me?
Wow. When it boils down to it, every dollar counts. And for our families who are supporting, especially as more and more two-parent households and single-parent households, even more so, are working and trying to make ends meet. Inflation. Have you looked at gas prices? Have you looked at food? I mean, just buying basic items now, you're saying to yourself, what are we going to have? You're going to have to take a closer deep dive into your budget. But
absolutely,
but with that being the case, that's where the rubber meets the road. And you mentioned earlier how we as citizens can get engaged. How can we as citizens, make our voice heard and ensure that the things that we're fighting for, that we need, the kitchen table talk, food at the kitchen table, gas and education of our children and so forth. How can we make sure that our voice is heard on those issues?
I would say to you, number one, follow the issues. No, I would say to you, number one, vote. That's what I would really say. Number one, don't just look at the sound bite. Okay. Now I'll give you an example of that because my staff just told me I had some more time, so I'm good.
Okay. Great.
They were like, you good, delegate.
Thank you, Will.
But you look at the sound bite of our current governor. I'm going to repeal the grocery tax, and that's going to put X amount of dollars into the pockets of the average Virginian. Okay, that's great. Okay, sounds good, right? But what the detail of it is, on face value, it looks great. But what do they say? The devil's in the details, right?
Right.
So the detail is that the grocery tax fund is a dedicated funding stream for localities. It's also a dedicated funding stream for transportation, okay? And it's a dedicated, and it has some money in there, like for our schools. So when you do away with that tax, you do away with that dedicated revenue source coming to the locality. Now, who are the people who are charged with opening recreation centers and funding programs for the summer and making sure the libraries are open and making sure that our streets, our local streets, not our interstate, but that we don't have potholes in our neighborhoods, that that our kids' playgrounds don't look a hot mess when they go out there and they're not, just playing in weeds and stuff. Who's responsible for the aquatic center and who's responsible for that's the local government, right? And so we're not like a typical business where you can just make more widgets or you can just raise the cost or you can just, I can set my goal and I'm just going to sell more houses or I'm just going to do whatever. You can't do that with local government. We can't make more citizens and more residents, right? And we can't continue to tax. So if you don't have that local income coming in, whose neighborhoods traditionally get left out?
Well,
and I don't have kids, but it's kids in my neighborhood who have to go to schools. It's kids in my neighborhood who don't have access to swimming programs and daycare programs and after school programs and summer camp programs for parents to be able to send their children to. Those are the ones that traditionally feel the brunt of the budget cuts.
Right.
And that's exactly what it is. And what you can't do is you can't balance consistent, dedicated money because we have a one-time revenue source of ARPA funds. Mm-hmm. That is irresponsible.
Absolutely.
It's totally irresponsible.
Let's talk about those one-time funds because we have really a once in a decade. And I always want to say generation, but I want to be careful with that because we don't really know what tomorrow brings. But we do know that we are flush with cash in the billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. And this is one time because we don't know where this other money is coming from, especially with all these proposed tax cuts. From your viewpoint now, everybody's got their hand out. Those that have want more. And they've been presenting bills upon bills. But from your perspective, your view, bird's eye view, what do you believe is the best way that we can prioritize that surplus for the greater citizens, especially here in Norfolk?
I think a great priority for it is schools. We have these lab schools and charter schools that are being proposed or whatever. But I can tell you, sitting on city council, and even before I sat on city council, just watching the cuts to education, you got to realize that you've had a Republican-led legislature for the last decade or so, and the only time you had a Democratic-led legislature was the last 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, 2 to 4 years, right?
Right.
So all the cuts to education have come on their watch. They cut it, and then they want to say it doesn't work. And then they say, well, let's go put our money to something else. That's ridiculous. So I would say education, number one, is definitely a piece. I would say neighborhood revitalization, making sure that we have good, again, recreation centers, libraries, after-school programs, things of that nature. We definitely want to make sure that we have good partnerships with our community colleges and our four-year universities to help folks who are looking to retool themselves to work in the next job market or even in the current job market, right?
Right, absolutely.
We want to do that. And then we also want proper, and I emphasize proper, training for law enforcement when they're in our neighborhood. Proper training. Proper.
It's interesting you mention that because, one thing about the Black Lives Matter movement of 2021 is that it shed the spotlight on a lot of not just inequities in healthcare, education, and poverty, but in policing. And I think that one of the greatest message that we had, the miscommunication of that movement as related to police, is that we don't want police. Our communities don't want it. And that could not be further from the truth.
Exactly.
A lot of our relatives are law enforcement, people who are in our community law enforcement. So we all love and support law enforcement, but it's not about that, but it's about the proper treatment and partnerships with our community. Exactly.
And you mentioned something as well with regard to health disparities. I think there is an opportunity, there is a golden opportunity to help with, perhaps getting some neighborhood type of clinics and things of that nature in neighborhoods where Black and brown people live who are underserved, so they don't have to travel so far, so seniors don't have to travel so far to be able to get adequate access to health care. Those are some of the things that would be very, very helpful to the quality of life of people. The quality of life, giving our children a proper education so that they can support themselves and get off your couch, by the way, and and creating an environment for safe and healthy neighborhoods, not just from a perspective of reducing violence, but also from a perspective of healthy food options, healthy food choices. And then making sure that we do have good interaction, because make no mistake about it, the police's job is to catch the bad guy. That's their job, and we want them to. If it's a bad guy and they've broken into your house, you really don't want them to be like, well, come on, dear Mr. Bad Guy, come on now. Right. You don't want that. If the bad guy broke into your house, you want the police to catch him and put him in jail, right?
Absolutely.
But we have also made the police the stopgap for everything else. If there's a mental health issue, call the police. If there's a child that's acting out, call the police. And that's not what they're designed to do. That's just not what they're designed to do. So those are the things that I think would help our community. Also, some investment. Norfolk has done a great job. And I don't know if you've had Councilwoman Danica Royster on your show, but they have done a fantastic job in putting together programs for entrepreneurs. Helping people get their business from an idea to a business. Right? And then getting that business to being viable and profitable. And so those are things that would lift up everybody.
Absolutely.
Not just a small few people who are very vanilla in shade.
Again, when all boats rise, it helps not just that boat, but it helps the greater community. Delegate Angela Williams-Grace, thank you so much for being with us. And Will, thank you as well, your chief of staff. He worked really hard to make this happen because we know, again, today is a major day on the Hill with the budget readout. And we want to thank you for your time and spreading your knowledge. And we have reached out to Councilwoman Royster Danica, so we look to have her on the show after the legislative session. So thank you so much. And listen, whatever we can do to be a support for the initiatives you have to increase the community, to let the community know what you're doing, let us know. We'll get the word out to make sure that there's support out there for those initiatives. Absolutely. Well, look, good luck to you. And after, we know we're in crossover, good luck to you for the great end of the session, and we'll talk later.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to your listeners. And again, I just encourage everybody to really reach out, pay attention to what's going on, and really reach out to your senators because it's in their hands in a matter of speaking now. And so all the craziness that will affect our community, it's on their side. And they need to know that you care.
Absolutely. And I like the way you put it. You said it's in their hands, but more importantly, it's in the hands of the citizens. Make your voice heard. Email your local delegate, call their office, make sure that the issues that you care about are at the forefront, because without you, the voter, the citizen, we can do what we do. And because of you is the reason why we do what we do. Delegate Angela Williams-Grace, thank you again for joining us. And for those that are listening, this is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be right back after these commercials break with part 2 of our overview of the General Assembly session.
The new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA, celebrates Black History Month.
When it comes to science and the pandemic, a name to know is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. The 35-year-old is the lead scientist on the team that developed the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Corbett has a PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. According to Corbett, there was so much knowledge based on previous lab work that her team was able to pull the trigger on the vaccine development. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, one of Time's 2021 Heroes of the Year.
Celebrating Black History Month, it's the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA.
It's a birthday Mardi Gras celebration at Brickster 600. Come celebrate DJ Heart Attack's birthday and Mardi Gras celebration on Tuesday, March 1st from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. There will be live entertainment, Creole food, king cakes, and more. And for lucky listeners, will have a chance to win and celebrate with DJ Heart Attack at his VIP table. It's a birthday Mardi Gras celebration with DJ Heart Attack at Brickster 600, Tuesday, March 1st.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Welcome back. This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Thank you again for joining us here on Stay the Water, where we have our general overview for the General Assembly session. We just had with us Delegate Angela Williams-Grace that represents here the 90th District here in Virginia, more specifically Norfolk, who was with us to talk about issues, talk about these major issues in the area, and talk about things that are really, really important, not just to her district, but really important across the board. We're very fortunate to have a large group of individuals that represent our area, not just for a job, right? But they do it because it's part of their passion. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us here on WNSB, the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA, as we broadcast live from the campus of the Norfolk State University. We have with us our producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, which we can hear every single day from Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. And you could hear him, and not just that, but you could hear our wonderful other shows that we have here on WNSB, our phenomenal jocks, our phenomenal personalities. Tune in. WNSB is a place where you get a diversity of shows, music, entertainment, personalities, the whole nine. So it's great having the radio station here on campus. So what I want to do in the second half hour, I want to talk a little bit about where we are with several issues in the legislature as it relates to various bills. So one thing that we mentioned that we discussed in the first half hour, we talked about education, we talked about voting, and we talked about the budget. But I want to focus on where we are as it relates to education and voting, access to the ballot box. because these are some major issues, Marvin, that really help to decide the future of our Commonwealth, the future of our people. Not just our people here in our community, at the university, but the people in the entire Commonwealth. Now, we do know that there was a major push for a lot of bills out there because of what I call the politics of education. All right. The politics and policy are totally different. They're separate. They work together, but they're separate. The politics are the stump speeches. The politics is, the buzzwords that get out and engage voters and sometimes enrage voters. So with that, but the policy is where the actual rubber meets the road. That's where the law is, and that's what pushes us and helps to dictate our behavior, our beliefs, and also resources. Now, you've heard me say this, a theory that I've developed and I teach from and read from and lecture from, and that's what I believe is the theory of law and public policy. I believe that law and public policy is created to do three things: in its intent or in its effect. And that's to control and dictate people, beliefs, and resources. And what I mean by that, whatever the law is, it controls where you go and where you can't go. It controls what you do and what you can't do. Over a course of time, Marvin, as you do things, it becomes what? Habit forming. And that habit then becomes a belief. And then the law and public policy dictates where the resources go, where the money goes. We just talked with the delegate about how we are flush with cash right now. I don't want to say once in a lifetime, because I hope to God it comes back. And I hope we're not flush with cash, but I hope we're steady with cash. We don't want to come up. We want to stay up. All right. In our personal and also in our state budget, our federal budget. Right. Because if you stay up, you don't have to keep coming up. I'm just going to throw that out there. But so we got a little bit over $1 billion, extra. That's a good position to be in. Everybody's got their hand out. But the policy that's getting ready to come out, the policy that at the end of this legislative session that's going to where the rubber meets the road, is where we believe, or not believe, but is where the money is going to be sent. So let's do a little deep dive, if we can, in the second half of the show about where we are with the education bills. Now, according to the governor's executive orders and directives, so he had 9 executive orders and 2 executive directives centered around mostly education and mandates. These are things that we see on the national level, which I believe is going to dictate the 2022 midterm congressional races. These are the issues that are going to be at the forefront, again, to engage and sometimes enrage various voter bases to go to the polls to vote so this policy can be created. So let's take a look at health mandates. So March 1st, it's been signed into law that masks, as it relates to COVID-19 in health, will now become optional for students and parents. So this is the law of the land, according to the Virginia Mercury. The Youngkin signs bill ending Virginia's school mask mandates. So this bill was actually fast-tracked, and it sets the March 1st deadline for schools to comply. Now, if you have been, if your kids in school and various school districts, they've started communicating this information. And some school districts actually have started, ended the mandate already, and others will end on March 1st. Some believe this is a good thing. Some believe it's not a good thing. But here's what happens. This is now the law of the land. So what does this look like in practice? All right, in practice. So Marvin, in practice, when kids go to school, you may have a mask on, but your classmate may not have a mask on. And it's going to be a mixed bag across the board. Now, of course, in schools, especially K through 12 schools, it's let's just say that's where you're developing, you're learning, you're building your self-confidence, getting your identity. What is the peer pressure going to be like? What is will there be bullying for those that do decide to wear against those that do decide to wear their mask and against those that do wear their mask, right? So where is that back and forth? And more specifically, where do school administrators stand? So in school administrative meetings with teachers and administrators, will some teachers have their mask on? Some will not. Will some principals or school administrators have their mask on? Will some not? So these are issues that we're constantly looking at. These are issues that will now create another dialogue within schools. If someone is sick and they don't have a mask on and they're still coming to school, where is that? Where do we stand there? What is the conversation with the various students? Where's the conversation with various parents? So, again, politics is the stump speech, the back and forth, the sausage making. The policy is the law of the land. And this is now the law of the land. So for all those listening, it's been fast-tracked, ending school. Law has been fast-tracked, ending school mask mandates in Virginia by the governor. He signed it, and all school divisions have to work to comply with a March 1st deadline to make masks optional. Now, again, he did not ban masks because, again, that'll be the opposite of a mask mandate, a ban of masks. So you couldn't do that because it's the exact same thing, just opposite of what you can and cannot do. But he made it optional. So that's where you're going to get the back and forth. And there was an article that I saw, I want to say it maybe the New York Times or another Washington Post, but it was an opinion article where it showed where our school boards, our school board meetings, our schools themselves, our parent meetings have become ground zero now for politics. It's become ground zero for conflict. Not so much conflict resolution, but conflict. These issues have become ground zero for, instead of creating policy to educate children, they're creating policy driving wedges through families. Exactly. I like that. Marvin said some engage and some enrage. Again, that's exactly what's happening. Is this a good thing? Is this the future of what our schools are going to be? Will this create another divide, another shake, another division in our schools? Is it now not based upon segregation of race or gender, or now is it based upon segregation of ideology? We'll see. We'll see what happens. But according to the Virginia Mercury, Youngkin stated that my strong hope is that this will put everything to bed, he says, and that we'll recognize that we now have a law of the land that in fact protects the rights of parents to make this decision. Now, according to Youngkin, he also emphasized that the bill he signed came from the state Senate, meaning that it could have passed without a handful of Democrats on board. So Senator Chap Peterson, Democrat out of Fairfax City, led the anti-mask effort in the Senate, and he also attended the ceremony on Wednesday of this past week, but he also declined to speak. So we see across the board this had support from some on the other aisle. But also, the chairwoman for the Democratic Party for Virginia said, at a time when our school divisions continue to face the ongoing effects of this pandemic and uncertainty about what lies ahead, we need to empower our school boards to remain nimble and meet the ever-changing needs of our schools and also students. But she said instead, the governor has chosen to strip them of their constitutional responsibilities and tie their hands. So, should this have been left up to school divisions? Should this have been left up to the elected officials, school board members of those communities that the parents actually elected to the school board? Or should it have come from the state? Once again, this is another issue that we're going back and forth with, and we'll see what happens. But we have 3 more months just about to the end of the school year, maybe 4 if you're looking at graduation for seniors in June. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to stay closely engaged on this issue. But what do you think? Will you keep wearing your mask? Do you think ending the mask mandate and making it optional is a good thing? Where do you stand as it relates to the pandemic? Do you think it's over? Do you think that we're going back to normal and as schools, students, no one should have masks? What are your thoughts? We want to know. Let us know at WNSBonline.org. That's at WNSBonline.org. You can send your comments to our social media, our Facebook page, our Instagram, and other social media avenues. Let us know what you think. Where do you stand? This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville, where we're now engaged in taking a look in our regular series of a view from the 2022 Virginia General Assembly series, and looking at laws and public policy that are impacting our community. In the first half hour, we had Delegate Angelia Williams-Graves that represents the 90th District here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, more specifically in the city of Norfolk, a longtime city councilwoman that's been doing the work on the ground in the local area, now doing the work there in Richmond on the Capitol. She took time out because today is the budget reading out for the House and the Senate. So we thank her for taking the time out to be with us to give us those golden nuggets that really impact our local area and that we as citizens really need to know what goes on, how it happens behind the scenes. Here in the second half hour, we're taking a look and breaking down several areas of where these laws and public policy are as it relates to mask and health priorities, these various mandates due to the pandemic, education, and also voting. So, Marvin, let's segue to education, because I want to say voting for last, because access to the ballot box is extremely important now and will be for years to come because of what we saw in 2020, what took place during our presidential election. But let's take a look at these bills that came forth out of the politics of teaching history. That's right, teaching history. In teaching history, the legal theory of CRT, critical race theory, was put forth, and now everybody uses CRT as a buzzword. Now, of course, many people don't know what CRT is. Critical race theory, which is simply a legal theory, and I actually teach from it myself. It's a legal theory which analyzes laws and public policy to determine any discriminatory effect in its intent or in its effect in whether it disadvantages one group or other groups and gives an unfair advantage to others. So case in point, the law of segregation, Jim Crow, it gave a major advantage to white citizens and gave a major disadvantage to black citizens, Native American citizens, individuals, and other individuals of color, but black citizens at the very forefront. It is what it is. It was in the law. That's what happened. There's nothing inherently racist or divisive about that. If you just simply read it, it says what it says. But what happened is that now, as we teach the full truth, the full story of history, we see a backlash. Listeners, this is nothing new. We saw it at the end of the Civil War with the Daughters of the Confederacy actually pushing to change the narrative of the quarter millennium, 250 years of slavery, and also the 100 years of Jim Crow, legalized segregation. So that's where we now get the history book reading of the very nice or the very caring or benevolent slave master. In actuality, it was not. That's why we're just learning the history about the slaves that built the White House, that built the Capitol building, that built every major building and structure in our country for the first 250 years. We're just learning about this, that tilled the ground and created agricultural products, which caused the United States to catapult to the number one economic force in agriculture, and at the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution, because of slavery. And why is that? Because you had the perfect pyramid. You had zero wages you had to pay, and everyone at the top got all the profit. That's perfect. That is the absolute perfect capitalist pyramid. That's what you dream for. I don't have to pay you anything, and I can work you all the years of your life and get the best out of you. And when it's done, I don't have to pay you anything afterwards. I could just put you in the ground on the clothes on your back. Perfect. And that's what we had. So that's why the United States was able to really excel almost immediately because of that perfect capitalist pyramid. So that's all about teaching history, teaching what really happened, just simply turning the page and saying, oh, this is what took place. But let's take a look at these bills. So according to Virginia Mercury, Virginia House passed legislation aimed at banning divisive concepts in public schools. So what has happened is that there are bills that were pretty much passed on party lines that basically, according to the Virginia Mercury, it bans educators from teaching concepts framed as divisive by many of the Republican leaders. Now, of course, this bill was endorsed, and what it really resembles is the Governor Youngkin's first executive order, where he banned so-called divisive concepts, including critical race theory in Virginia schools. By the way, critical race theory is not taught in Virginia schools. So you're banning something that doesn't exist, or that's not happening. But what ends up happening is that now it creates a punishment of teachers who are found to be teaching these things that are inherently divisive. And what are inherently racist things, divisive things? The legislation would ban public school employees from teaching concepts largely related to race, including, quote, that one race or sex is inherently superior to the other. And it's also aimed at, quote unquote, equity initiatives by Virginia school districts, some which have focused on the concept of privilege among students or racial affinity groups among teachers, intended to provide safe spaces for educators to speak about their experiences. Now, they also included specifically allowing educators to teach about the lost cause, a push by ex-Confederates and their defenders to frame the Civil War in favorable terms to the South and the Jim Crow era. This, according to our delegate, Clinton Jenkins, out of Suffolk. So he actually introduced an amendment that would exempt the story, that exempted the story of Rupert Bridges, which is the first black student to desegregate an all-white school. So, and also another delegate, Sally Hudson out of Charlottesville, endorsed a change that would allow instructional policy that led to existing wealth and income gaps between different races and genders. So, quote, when it comes to dollars and cents, we always end up unequal. According to Delegate Hudson, I don't know how anyone could in good conscience teach American history, civics, or economics without confronting how race and gender drive income and wealth inequality in this country. Those amendments were voted unanimously down by the Republicans in the House, saying that the legislation wouldn't prohibit any specific history lessons. So now we have bills that are in the hands of the Senate, as Delegate Williams-Gray said. They're in the hands of the Senate to either pass or defeat, that would now limit and not limit, but ban public school teachers and employees from teaching all of history, but would allow the teaching of the lost cause, which is a favorable look at the Civil War toward the South and Jim Crow. If you're listening to this show and you don't agree with that, again, make your voice heard. Contact your local delegate. Email them. Pick up the phone and call them and say, listen, I want all of history taught to my kids. I want to learn all of history. Just simply read what took place and allow the citizen to make the decision for themselves. That's how we can stay engaged. But what are your thoughts? Are these bills good? Are concepts, which basically tells us that there are laws and public policies that gave an advantage to some and disadvantaged many? Do you think that signing a bill to ban that is a good thing? Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think at WNSBonline.org. That's at WNSBonline.org. Or do you believe that all of our history should be taught? Respond to our Facebook page or to our other social media avenues. Let us know your thoughts. Finally, I want us to take a look at voting. Access to the ballot box. Access to the ballot box is what has really caused a lot of our citizens to be engaged in what's happening daily in politics, thereby dictating policy. So with that being the case, we know that Virginia last year was the first state of the South to create a state-level Voting Rights Act to protect the rights of individuals to vote. In other words, on the state level, local elections have to adhere to the law of the land. And not only that, but there are protectionisms that are placed in the event that anyone feels that their rights are being abridged on the local level and also the state level for elections. Now, keep in mind, congressional elections, these are governed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and also other elections overall. But however, as it relates to state, the Virginia State Voting Rights Act, which protects the rights of citizens, is the law of the land. Well, let's take a look at what's happening in the Virginia just 1 year General Assembly as it relates to voting. Now, before we get into these bills that are limiting voting, let's talk about how many people voted because access to the ballot box was opened up. We extended voting to 45 days early voting. We created no excuse absentee voting, which means that you can go ahead and cast a vote absentee and don't have to tell the reason why. And let me tell you, for someone who tried to vote absentee myself, before this no excuse absentee, to try to fit my excuse into those narrow areas was almost impossible. But because of that, in 2017, 192,000 people voted absentee in the gubernatorial election here in Virginia. In 2021, because of those changes, over 2.1 million people extra voted early absentee. 1.2 million to be exact, as opposed to 190,000 in 2017, just 4 years ago. Marvin, that's a win. That is a win. But what happens now is that these bills that have been put forth by the House have started to limit access to the voting box. So let's take a look at a few. House Bill 34, it limits the drop-off locations for absentee ballots. House Bill 35 reinstates excuse requirement for absentee voting or voting by mail. House Bill 36 repeals automatic absentee voter lists and regular sending of ballots to voters. House Bill 39 limits absentee voting to 2 weeks prior to the election. And House Bill 149 adds a witness requirement for absentee ballots, including you got to put your address, your social security number, and date of birth. I don't know how many people want to give that personal information just to witness a ballot. House Bill 175 removes permanent absentee voting lists and makes an annual absentee voter list. This is very disturbing because now when you're removing lists, you're removing names of people who have voted. And then finally, House Bill 779 creates a voter photo ID requirement, absentee voting only 1 week prior to Election Day, no absentee voting list, and no absentee ballots counted after the polls close. That means if your absentee ballot is not in before the polls close on Election Day, it doesn't count. Is that fair? Is that the way our democracy should work? And according to the Brennan Center, their research and voting laws roundup February 2022, they stated that as of 2022, state legislative sessions started to begin. They've already introduced more restrictive voting legislation than at this time last year. And what does that mean overall? As of January 14th, January 14th, legislators in 27 states introduced and pre-filed or carried over 250 bills with restricted provisions. Of that 250, Virginia, we had 20 in the House. So we see how important the fight is for voting. We see how important it is for us to be engaged on every level to ensure that what we're doing, we're making sure that our community and our voice is heard. And that's why the fight to vote, the fight to educate, the fight to ensure that our community is taken care of, your community is taken care of, is vitally important, not just for the now, but for the future generations to come. So that's why we want you to continue to stay engaged, and that's why we're staying engaged for you. So that's it. Once again, we finish another phenomenal hour here on Stay the Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. Once again, we'd like to thank Delegate Angelia Williams-Grace, who gave us time today on this busy day on the Capitol to give us some golden nuggets of what's taking place behind the scenes. Join us every Sunday at 1 p.m. as we continue our overview from the 2022 General Assembly session. Until next time, be well and God bless.